Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most intense, frankly brutal, and high-stakes races in human history. We're talking about a centuries-long battle between European powers over global wealth that literally redrew the map of the world. I am so excited to share this with you because the sheer scale of the ambition and the utter ruthlessness is just mind-blowing. We're going to unpack exactly how a basic quest for kitchen ingredients escalated into the martial conquest of an entire subcontinent. All right, let's dive right in.
So, I want you to ask yourself something. What would you do, or I guess what would an entire nation do, for a 3,000% return on investment? It sounds like a total scam, right? Or maybe some impossible crypto fantasy. But back in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, this wasn't hypothetical at all. It was the very real, very tangible reward waiting at the end of an incredibly dangerous sea voyage.
And 3,000% is the exact number. In May 1498, when Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama successfully rounded the Cape of Good Hope, hit the port of Calicut in India, and finally made it back to Lisbon, he brought back goods that sold for 60 times the cost of his entire 2-year voyage. 60 times. As you can probably guess, news of this staggering profit spread through Lisbon like wildfire. It instantly kicked off a frenzied, cutthroat competition to dominate this brand new market.
But what exactly were they buying? Gold? Diamonds? Well, no. The ultimate prize here was spices. Literally the stuff sitting in your kitchen cabinet right now. Pepper, cinnamon, ginger, and cloves. Now, you might be wondering, why were these so incredibly valuable? You see, Europeans back then relied heavily on meat, but they had absolutely no refrigeration. They only had fresh meat for a few months out of the year. For the rest of the long, freezing winter, that meat would be virtually inedible without spices to act as partial preservatives and honestly mask the terrible taste. It was quite literally a matter of basic survival and palatable living. This whole era was driven by one simple reality, which historian Brian Gardner captures perfectly. Wealth could literally be measured in spices. People were prepared to die in search of them, and many, many did. Spices weren't just for cooking. They were the basis of many medicines, they were a hugely acceptable diplomatic gift, and they were the ultimate status symbol. If you had spices, you had power. And that incredible allure tempted the most ambitious merchants in Lisbon, Amsterdam, and London to risk absolutely everything.
Section 1. The First Movers. The Portuguese Rise and Brutal Fall. So da Gama's first visit might have opened the door, right? But when he went back in 1502, he wasn't taking any chances. He showed up with a fleet of 15 heavily armed ships, and he just blasted the Calicut port to debris. And it gets so much worse. They captured several Muslim vessels, and the source texts detail how these captives were brutally mutilated, cutting off the ears, noses, and hands of about 800 people. This marked a definitive, horrific shift from peaceful trade to using sheer terror to enforce a monopoly. As Portuguese wealth skyrocketed, they fortified their settlements, ultimately making Goa their capital on Indian soil. But with all that power came intense religious persecution. Jesuit missionaries arrived, and by 1560, they had actually introduced the Inquisition to Goa. The source material describes a massive church prison built in the 1600s, a complex of 200 separate cells. And these weren't standard holding cells. They were divided by walls 5 feet thick, entered through double doors, and reinforced with heavy iron latticework. It was all designed to induce penitence through extreme suffering and isolation. The crucial takeaway here is that this extreme arrogance and cruelty eventually led to their downfall. At the absolute height of their prosperity, the Portuguese were engaging in horrific slave trading practices. They were even kidnapping orphan children to forcefully convert them. Their brazen boldness really peaked when they captured 2 slave girls who actually belonged to Mumtaz Mahal. Yes, the very woman the Taj Mahal was built for. Obviously, that did not go unanswered. The Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan ordered his governor in Bengal to punish them, leading to a massive siege that captured their settlement at Hooghly in 1632, killing or imprisoning huge numbers of Portuguese soldiers.
Section 2. The Challengers. Dutch and French rivals enter the game.
Smelling blood and profits in the water, other European competitors jumped in. In incredibly rapid succession, they formed their own massive state-sponsored corporate monopolies. You had the English East India Company in 1600, the Dutch VOC in 1602, and later the French East India Company in 1664. Now, these weren't just standard businesses. Their home governments actually empowered them to wage war, sign treaties, acquire territories, and build fortresses. They were essentially heavily armed nations operating under a corporate logo. And the rivalry between these newcomers, it was fierce and bloody.
The Dutch were completely ruthless in securing their monopoly, famously committing a cruel massacre of 10 Englishmen and 9 Japanese at Amboina in 1623 just to protect their interests. Over in India, they made Surat their commercial capital, pulling in average yearly profits of 640,000 rupees by trading spices, diamonds, and saltpetre. Then you have the French, who arrived a bit later. They captured islands like Mauritius for quick naval offensives, and actually peaked with 25% annual profits. But European rivalries totally exhausted their resources, forcing them into a severe decline by 1720, long before their failed attempt to build an empire under Dupleix.
Section 3. The Late Bloomers. Enter the English. Okay, picture this. It's 1608, and Captain William Hawkins drops anchor off Surat. He was in for a serious rude awakening. Surat was this massive, bustling, global gateway packed with merchants from all over Asia. Hawkins quickly realizes, to his absolute despair, that India has zero need for English trade. None. Why? Well, the English showed up bringing things like heavy wool and domestic goods. In India, Indian merchants didn't want English wool, they wanted specie, gold and silver. It was a massive, almost comical mismatch of supply and demand. And I think this really proves just how incredibly lucrative the East was. Despite that rough start and some fierce Portuguese opposition, the English East India Company's third voyage still netted a staggering 234% profit. As our source notes, this adventurous voyage literally became the talk of London. It was so insanely successful that by 1609 the company stopped financing voyages separately and shifted to a permanent joint stock basis. The English were officially in the game to stay. Yet despite all this success, their official strategy remained entirely peaceful. After years of haggling, Sir Thomas Roe managed to secure a royal firman, basically a decree, from the Mughal Emperor Jahangir in 1619 to erect factories. But Roe gave some very strict advice to the company back in London. He warned them against seeking any territorial acquisition in India, explicitly advising his countrymen to rest content with profits derived from quiet trade. Section 4. The Turning Point. From Trade to Empire. The contrast here is just staggering. As our text points out, the original 1600 EIC charter granted by Queen Elizabeth envisaged the company purely as a commercial enterprise. There was no reference whatsoever to acquiring territories or legislating governance. But fast forward to the late 17th century, and the reality is totally different. The company is suddenly exercising martial law, levying taxes, erecting courts, and forcefully transforming into a sovereign power eager to establish its position by force. And we can actually pinpoint the exact moment this pivot happened in the historical record. The peaceful trading body was suddenly dramatically replaced by a power hungry for territorial acquisition. The smoking gun is this genuinely chilling directive from Gerald Angier, the governor of Bombay, who wrote back to the Court of Directors in 1669. He states, flat out, "The times now require you to manage your general commerce with the sword in your hands." Just like that, quiet trade was officially dead. The sword was now the primary instrument of commerce. And guess what? The corporate bosses in London loved it. In 1687, the directors fully approved this violent change in policy. They wrote to their chief at Madras, ordering the establishment of both civil and military power to lock down a large revenue stream. Their stated goal, written right there in the text, was to lay the foundation to secure English dominion in India for all time to come. Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought to ponder. We started this explainer looking at European merchants risking their lives to buy kitchen spices like cinnamon and cloves for a massive payout. But somewhere along the line, the pursuit of that 3,000% return justified blasting ports, taking hostages, wielding the sword, and ultimately subjugating an entire continent. So you have to ask yourself, when exactly does a corporation stop being a business and become an empire? It is a fascinating and terrifying piece of history. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack it today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.